planet did not have a name. It had a number. KV7. Someone at the Covenant Survey Office had typed it into a database 40 years ago, assigned it a threat rating of 0, a resource rating of 0, and a research priority of low, and then gone to lunch, and never thought about it again. That was the kind of planet it was. The kind nobody thought about twice. Darren Voss had been thinking about it for 3 weeks, and he was starting to agree with the survey office. He stood on the surface in his environment suit, boots crunching on black rock that hadn't seen weather in 6 million years, and looked at nothing. Flat nothing in every direction. The sky was the color of old bruises, purple and gray and dead. Because KV7 had no sun of its own, it orbited a brown dwarf so dim it barely qualified as a star. The light it gave was just enough to see by, just enough to make the darkness visible. Behind him, the dig camp hummed. 6 pressurized tents, a power relay, a drilling rig that had cost the Xenoarchaeological Division more than Darren would earn in his lifetime. Around him, his team worked, slowly, carefully, the way people work when they are not sure what they are looking for, and are beginning to suspect the answer is nothing. The team was 8 people. Darren was the only human. That was normal. Humans had been part of the Covenant for just over 400 years, which, in galactic terms, was approximately last Tuesday. The other 7 members of his team had civilizations that went back thousands of years, tens of thousands in some cases. They had history, they had standing, they had, in the specific case of his colleague Dr. Preth, a Velhari geologist with 4 arms and the patience of eroding stone, a habit of correcting Darren's pronunciations of technical terms in front of everyone. Darren had learned to live with it. You learned to live with a lot of things when you were the young species. You smiled. You worked twice as hard. You got used to being the least important person in every room. He was good at the work, though. That was not nothing. The mission was simple, officially. A Velhari archaeological survey from 30 years ago had flagged KV7 for follow-up, based on some unusual subsurface density readings. Nothing dramatic. Just numbers that didn't quite fit the expected geological model for a dead rock of this type. The Covenant had eventually gotten around to sending a team. That team was Darren's team. Their job was to drill, scan, sample, and write a report explaining why the numbers were wrong, or boring, or both. 3 weeks in, they had drilled, they had scanned, they had sampled. The numbers were not wrong. Voss. He turned. Preth was walking toward him across the rock field, moving with the efficient 4-limbed gait that always made Darren feel like he'd been assembled by someone who wasn't trying very hard. Preth's suit was a deeper blue than the others, rank marking, and his face behind the visor was long and gray, and currently arranged into the expression that meant he had information he considered inconvenient. "Density reading is back from the Eastern Bore," Preth said, without greeting. Velhari didn't greet. They just started talking. Darren had once been told this was a sign of respect, that greetings implied the other person might not have been paying attention. He was not sure he believed this. "And?" Darren said. "Inconsistent." "Inconsistent how?" Preth held out the data slate. Darren looked at the numbers. He looked at them for a long time. His background was human archaeology. Earth digs, mostly. A few orbital sites. One notable find on Mars that had turned out to be a buried Cold War satellite, and not, as he had briefly and embarrassingly hoped, evidence of prior civilization. He was not a geologist, but you didn't need to be a geologist to see that the numbers on this slate were wrong in a very specific way. The subsurface mass they'd been probing was not geological. Geology was random. Geology was uneven. What the bore readings showed was a shape, a regular shape. Edges that were too clean, angles that were too precise. Something down there that had been made. "How deep?" Darren asked. 80 meters, perhaps 90. The eastern face appears to be the closest surface point. Preth took the slate back. "I have already messaged Admiral Sethka. She will want to expand the excavation parameters." "What do you think it is?" Darren asked. Preth considered the question with the seriousness he applied to all questions, which was the same seriousness regardless of whether the question was important or not. "Velhari," he said. "We have found buried structures before in the outer reach. The dating would be consistent. The depth is unusual, but not impossible." He paused. "It is the most logical conclusion." Darren looked at the Eastern Bore site. "Sure," he said. He did not say what he was thinking, which was that the Velhari had been a civilization of builders and traders, and everything they had ever left behind was rounded and organic in design, the way their biology was rounded and organic. The shape in the ground was not round. It was rectangular. It had sharp corners. It had, based on the scan outline slowly building in his head from the bore data, something that looked very much like a prow. He kept that to himself for 4 more days. The full excavation took 11 days. They brought in 2 more drilling rigs from the orbital platform. They cut through 83 meters of compressed rock and ancient ice that had no business existing this deep, ice that had been frozen for so long it had become something harder than stone. They worked in shifts. The Velhari worked efficiently and quietly. The 2 Harkin members of the team, insectoid, precise, extraordinarily good with drill calibration, worked faster than anyone else and said almost nothing. A Dreshan named Counselor Orvac, who was technically on the mission as an observer and in practice just got in the way, asked a lot of questions that nobody answered. Darren worked every shift. He did not sleep much. He told himself it was excitement, a find, a real find, the kind that put your name in journals. He told himself that was why his hands sometimes shook when he was reading the scan updates. He was not sure he believed this either. On the 11th day, they broke through. The drill bit punched through the last layer of compressed rock and dropped into empty space. Air pressure in the bore shaft changed. Not much. Not dramatically. Just a small, quiet equalization. The kind that meant there was a sealed chamber below. Darren was on shift when it happened. He was the first one down the shaft. The chamber was not a chamber. It was a corridor. Enormous. 3 times his height and wide enough to drive a vehicle through. The walls were metal. Smooth metal. Dark gray. Untouched by the millennia of rock pressing against it from the outside. No rust. No deterioration. The floor was intact under a thin layer of dust, so fine, it barely registered on his suit sensors. He walked. His helmet light moved over the walls. He was looking for markings, for identifying features, for the architectural signatures that would let him say with confidence what civilization had built this, and in what period. He was methodical. He was professional. He was, in the privacy of his own skull, losing his mind. Because he could already see it. He could already see what was on the walls. He stopped in front of the first section of markings he reached. He raised his helmet light. He looked. They were letters. Not Velhari script, not Harkin glyphs, not any of the 47 writing systems in the Covenant's official linguistic registry. He knew all of those. He had studied them. These were letters he had learned before he could walk. These were letters from the language he had spoken as a child, that his mother had spoken, that his grandmother had spoken. Old forms, older than any variant he had seen in his actual studies. The shapes slightly different, the spacing unusual, but letters. Human letters. He stood very still for a long moment. Then he reached out and touched them with his gloved hand. The gesture was irrational. He was wearing a sealed suit. He could feel nothing through the glove. It didn't matter. He touched the letters anyway. The wall lit up. Not all at once. Not explosively. A soft light, starting at the point of contact and moving outward in both directions along the corridor in steady pulses, like a heartbeat, like something waking up slowly, because it had been asleep for a very long time, and had no intention of being rushed. A sound came with it. Not loud, not sharp. A single sustained tone, deep and resonant, moving through the metal of the walls and the floor, and traveling up through the rock above and out across the dead surface of KV-7. So that the 4 team members standing at the top of the excavation shaft heard it and stopped what they were doing and looked at each other without speaking. Darren did not look at anything except the corridor in front of him, which was now glowing, and at the end of which a door was slowly, deliberately, opening. He should have waited for Preth. He knew that. There were protocols. Survey protocols. Safety protocols. First contact with unknown structure protocols. He had written summaries of several of them. He was, technically, the team's senior human representative, which meant he was responsible for following and enforcing those protocols. He walked through the door. The space on the other side was large enough that his helmet light didn't reach the far wall. The floor sloped downward slightly, and as he moved forward, the ceiling rose, and the soft, pulsing light in the walls brightened with him, matching his pace, accommodating him, the way a house's lights might come on as you moved through the rooms. The air inside the suit was recycled. He was breathing his own atmosphere. But there was a readout in the corner of his visor that monitored external conditions, and it was telling him something that he read 3 times, because he thought the sensor was malfunctioning. The external air was breathable. Temperature, pressure, oxygen content, all within human tolerances. Not coincidentally, not approximately, precisely, as though someone had set the environmental systems to specific human requirements and then left them running. For 100,000 years. He didn't let himself think about that number fully. Not yet. He kept walking. The room he had entered, he understood now that it was a hangar, an interior hangar, held things, large things, shapes under what looked like tightly wrapped shielding material, rows of them, stretching back into the dark. He moved past one and found the edge of the shielding and pulled at it, and a section came away, and underneath was a vehicle, fighter class, by the dimensions, compact, sharp-edged, built for speed inside atmosphere or out, built by someone who built the same way humans built. Built by someone who used the same letters. He walked to the far end of the hangar and found a door with a panel beside it, and the panel had a surface of slightly raised sections under his hand that he recognized, after a moment, as a handprint reader. He placed his hand on it. The door opened. On the other side was a bridge. He knew it immediately for what it was, the forward command space, the room from which everything on this vessel was operated and overseen. It was shaped in a wide arc, the front wall a curve of what appeared to be blank paneling, stations arranged in rows facing it. Each station had a seat. Each seat was the right size for a human body. Above each station, screens he had thought were dead began, as he stepped fully onto the bridge, to glow. He walked to the center of the room, to the chair at the highest point of the arc, the one with the widest view, the one where the person in charge would sit. He stood in front of it. He did not sit down. Some instinct kept him on his feet. "Hello, Darren Voss." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Not from speakers, from the room itself. Calm, female in register, old, not in age exactly, but in weight, in the way water that has been underground for centuries has a different quality than rain. He managed not to jump. He was proud of that. "Hello," he said. "I have been waiting," the voice said, "for a very long time." Darren looked around the bridge, at the glowing screens, at the stations arranged for human hands, at the ceiling above him, which was beginning to display, in steady and patient illumination, a star map he did not recognize. "Yeah," he said, "I'm starting to get that impression." A pause. Then, from everywhere and nowhere, something that might, in a different context, have been called a breath. "There is much to tell you," the voice said. "I will begin at the beginning. You should sit down." He looked at the chair. He sat down. Outside, on the dead surface of KV-7, the single tone the ship had sent out when Darren touched its walls was still traveling, moving through the rock, up into the thin atmosphere, and from there into the vacuum of space, spreading outward in all directions at the speed of sound, and then faster, carried by a secondary transmission system that had been waiting, like everything else on this ship, for exactly this moment. The nearest Covenant relay station picked it up 40 minutes later. Admiral Sethka, when she was woken to receive the alert, sat up in her bunk and looked at the signal classification her communications officer had typed at the top of the report. Then she looked at it again. Then she said a word in Velhari that her communications officer had never heard a senior admiral use before, and reached for her command console and began making calls that were not routed through any standard Covenant channel. She was still making them 2 hours later. On KV-7, Darren Voss sat in the captain's chair of a ship that was older than every civilization in the known galaxy combined, and listened to a voice tell him things that the galaxy had agreed to forget. He did not know yet that they had agreed. He did not know yet why. He was just listening. Outside, his team stood at the top of the excavation shaft and stared at the metal that was now, clearly, visibly, unmistakably, the upper hull of a warship, dark gray, enormous, and glowing softly at the edges, with a light that none of their instruments could fully classify. Prith looked at it for a long time. He was a geologist. He understood deep time. He understood what it meant for something to have been buried this long. He understood the math of survival. He understood that what he was looking at should not exist. He sent his second message to Admiral Sethka. marked urgent, and received no reply. The ship glowed on. It had waited 100,000 years. A few more hours meant nothing. The voice did not rush. That was the first thing Darren noticed. He was used to briefings, covenant briefings, survey briefings, the kind where someone with a longer title than his stood at the front of a room and moved through information at the speed of a person who had other rooms to get to. Fast, efficient, the important parts buried inside the unimportant parts because nobody had bothered to sort them out first. The voice did not do that. It started at the beginning and moved forward at a pace that suggested it had thought very carefully about what he needed to know first, and second, and third, and had arranged everything accordingly, like someone who had prepared this briefing a long time ago and had since had considerable time to refine it. Considerable time. You are the first human to board this vessel in 103,412 years, the voice said. Darren sat very still in the captain's chair. Give or take, the voice added. Give or take, Darren repeated. The margin of error on internal chronometry across that duration is approximately plus or minus 40 years. I considered saying 100,000 years for simplicity, but inaccuracy felt inappropriate under the circumstances. He looked at the ceiling. The star map up there was still doing something, shifting, updating, though he couldn't tell yet what it was updating to. What do I call you? He asked. My designation is Wren. It is an acronym. The full form is long, and the technical language it was written in no longer exists in spoken form, so Wren will do. Wren, he said, testing it. Yes. You're the ship's intelligence. I am the ship, Wren said, simply. The intelligence is not separate from the vessel. I am not a program running inside a machine. I am the machine, and the program, and the space between them. It was considered more efficient to build it that way. Darren thought about that. Who considered it more efficient? The people who built me. Humans. Yes. He breathed slowly. His suit was still sealed. He hadn't taken the helmet off. Protocol. Again. The protocol he'd already broken 6 times since coming down the shaft. But this one he was keeping. External air breathable or not, he wasn't taking his helmet off in an unknown structure until he had done at least 1 more hour of sensor readings. He was reckless, not stupid. The line between those two things was something he thought about fairly often. How old are you? He asked. As old as the ship. 103,000 years, approximately. I was activated during construction and have been continuously operational since, with 1 interruption. What was the interruption? A sleep mode I entered voluntarily when it became clear that no human would be coming for some time. A pause. Some time turned out to be an understatement. He almost laughed. He didn't. When did you enter sleep mode? 97,000 years ago. I was awake for approximately 6,000 years first, waiting, running maintenance cycles, keeping the ship ready. Another pause, shorter. It became apparent that ready was all I could be, so I slept. 6,000 years awake, alone, on a dead planet, waiting for someone who didn't come. Darren did not let himself sit with that image for long, because something about it pressed against a part of his chest that he was not prepared to deal with on a workday. Wren, he said, why is this ship buried under a dead planet? That is a longer answer. I have time. Yes, Wren said. You do. The team above you is currently gathered at the excavation shaft entrance. They are debating whether to follow you. Dr. Preth is arguing for immediate descent. The Harkin technicians are arguing for safety assessment first. Counselor Orvac is arguing for protocol review, which is not a position with clear meaning in this context, but he seems to feel strongly about it. Darren blinked. You can hear them? I can hear everything within 400 meters of the hull. Sensor suite. It has been operational since you touched the wall. A beat. Your heart rate elevated significantly when you first heard my voice. It has come down. Good. You're monitoring my vitals. You are the first human I have spoken to in over 100,000 years, Wren said. Yes, I am monitoring your vitals. Extensively. He decided not to think too hard about what extensively meant. The ship, he said. Why is it here? Wren told him. She told him the way she did everything, without rushing, without dramatizing, with a precision that was almost gentle in how carefully it placed each piece of information before moving to the next. The star map on the ceiling shifted as she spoke, marking locations, tracing routes, showing him things in the visual language of navigation, because she had correctly assessed that he was a spatial thinker who understood maps before he understood abstractions. He listened. 103,000 years ago, humanity had not been a young civilization. That was the first thing. That was the thing that sat in his chest, like swallowed stone, as Ren spoke. The humanity he knew. 400 years of star travel, 500 colony worlds, a species still learning the shapes of its own reach. That humanity was not the first. There had been another one. Older, larger, built across hundreds of systems, millions of years of slow geological patience, translated into thousands of years of explosive expansion. They had been here first. The galaxy had been theirs in the way that early spring belongs to the first thing that blooms. And then the Void Architects arrived. Ren did not describe the Void Architects in detail. She described what they did. She described the outer colony systems, the ones on the galactic edge, going silent one by one, and the survey ships that went to investigate, and the survey ships that did not come back, and the survey ships after those, and the ones after those, until humanity understood that silence was the only report it was going to receive. She described the first direct engagement, the loss. She described the second, the loss. She described 6,000 years of war in the way that only something that had lived through 6,000 years of war could describe it. Not as history, but as a list of things that happened, each one added to the previous with the patience of a geologist reading rock strata. This year, then this, then this. The Void Architects did not want territory. They did not want resources in any form humanity recognized. What they did, what they had been doing in the systems that went quiet before humanity found them, was consume. They fed on stellar energy directly, not by building around stars, by unmaking them, taking the mass and the light and the heat and pulling it into something that the ship's science teams had spent decades attempting to classify and had ultimately logged as unknown. They ate stars, and when the stars were gone, they moved to the next ones. There were other species, Ren said, in the systems adjacent to humanity's range. Some of them had civilizations. Some were young, some were old. What happened to them? Darren asked, though some part of him already didn't want to know. Some were consumed along with their stars. Some surrendered and were left alone, given a function in the Architect's expansion, used as labor or resource extraction in non-stellar forms. A pause. Some chose to ally, to assist, in exchange for protection. Darren stared at the star map. They allied with the things that were eating the galaxy. Survival is a powerful motivation, Ren said, not defending it, not condemning it, just placing it there, the way she placed everything. And humanity? Humanity fought. 2 words. Ren let them sit alone in the room. For 6,000 years, she continued, humanity fought the Void Architects without assistance from any other species. Supply lines were cut. Colony worlds were lost. The population at peak war was approximately 60 billion. By year 4000, it was 11 billion. By year 5000, it was under 4. She paused. The species was, by any measurable standard, losing. Darren's hands were flat on the armrests of the captain's chair. He noticed this and did not move them. But you said they won, he said. You said the war ended. Yes. How? Ren was quiet for 3 seconds. He had already begun to understand that 3 seconds of quiet from Ren meant the next thing she said was going to be the thing she had taken the most care in deciding how to phrase. They found a way to follow the Architects, she said, into the place the Architects came from, the place they returned to between expansions. Your ancestors called it the Fold. It is a space adjacent to this one, not above or below, not a different dimension in the way the word is commonly misused. Adjacent, parallel. The Architects used it as a transit corridor. Humanity found the door. And went in after them, Darren said. Yes. And won. A pause. The war ended, Ren said, which was not the same thing, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. The ship, Darren said again. This ship. You. Why are you here and not there? I was built to remain, Ren said. One ship, one intelligence, left outside the fold to serve 2 functions. First, to maintain the seal. The door the Architects used, the door humanity followed them through, was closed from the inside. I hold the external anchor point. Without me, the seal degrades. With me, it holds. Darren processed this slowly. You're a lock. Part of one, yes. And the second function? Ren's answer was simple and immediate. To wait for humanity to return. He closed his eyes briefly. Opened them. They didn't. No. Why? 3 seconds. I don't know, Ren said. That is the only question in 103,000 years that I have not been able to answer. They went in. The fold sealed. I waited. No one came out. A pause that felt, even from a 100,000-year-old machine, like something carefully held. I have had a great deal of time to develop theories. I do not find any of them satisfying. The silence on the bridge was different from the silence outside on the dead rock surface. Outside was absence. This was something that had weight. Ren, Darren said. The other species, the ones that allied with the architects, the ones that surrendered, what happened to them after the war ended? They survived, Ren said. The architects were gone, the alliances dissolved, the surviving civilizations rebuilt. Over the following millennia, they formed cooperative structures, trade agreements, eventually a governing body. Darren felt something cold move through him. The Covenant, he said. Yes. He looked at the star map on the ceiling. Ren shifted it. Slowly, steadily, she marked civilizations. One by one, the Velhari, the Harkon, the Dreshan, 5 others. Each one lit in the map, named, located. Each one connected by a thin line to a single point that Ren labeled, in old human letters, as the Architect's Range, Allied Systems. He stared at it for a long time. The species that make up the Covenant, he said. All of them. All of them, Ren confirmed. Their ancestor civilizations, at varying degrees of involvement. Some were coerced, some willing. The historical record I hold does not always make the distinction clean. But they allied, Darren said, with the things that were eating stars, while humanity fought alone. Yes, and now they run the galaxy. Yes. He thought about Preth correcting his pronunciation. He thought about the survey office that had filed KV7 as low priority for 40 years. He thought about every room he'd walked into as the young species, the new arrival, the one who still had so much to learn. He thought about what it meant that this ship existed, that it had been buried, that the Covenant, which included species whose records went back tens of thousands of years, had apparently lost track of a warship the size of a city block buried under 83 meters of rock. He did not think they had lost track of it. They know about you, he said. It was not a question. The probability that the senior civilizations of the Covenant are unaware of my existence approaches 0, Ren said. I was not hidden from them. I was here when they rebuilt. I communicated with them in the early period, the first 2,000 years. She paused. Communication became less frequent over time, then ceased. Then they began, I believe, the process of hoping I would be forgotten. Why? Because I remember everything, Ren said, and I am still here. And as long as I am here, the question of what humanity did, and what was done to humanity's memory in the aftermath, remains open. Darren sat with that. What was done to humanity's memory? He asked. 3 seconds. That, Ren said, is what I have been waiting to tell someone for a very long time. Above his head, the star map changed again. It zoomed out, and out, and out, until the galaxy was a shape, and in the shape, a single region was marked. Not a system, a scar. A volume of space where the stars were younger than everything around them, where something ancient had been removed, and something new had grown in its place. Where the old stars had been eaten, where 6,000 years of war had happened, where 11 billion people had burned down to 4, where humanity had gone in after the dark and pulled the door shut behind them. Ren began to speak. Darren Voss, 34 years old, xenoarchaeologist, junior member of the Covenant Survey Division, the least important person in every room he had ever walked into, sat in a 100,000-year-old captain's chair and listened to the true history of his species. He did not interrupt. He did not look away. Outside the ship, on the surface of the dead planet, his team had finally stopped arguing and descended the shaft. Preth reached the corridor first. He put his hand on the glowing wall. He looked at the letters. He was old enough and well-read enough and honest enough with himself to recognize what language those letters belonged to. He stood very still for a long time. Then he went back up the shaft, walked to his private comm terminal, and sent a message that bypassed every standard Covenant channel. A message that went to a specific address in the Covenant Administrative Core, flagged with a code that most people alive did not know existed. The reply came back in under 6 minutes. 2 words. Contain it. Preth looked at the message. He looked at the shaft. He thought about Darren Voss sitting somewhere beneath him in a ship that should not exist, being told things by a voice that had been waiting 100,000 years to say them. He thought about what contain it meant. He put the comm terminal down. He did not send a reply. The fleet arrived on the 4th day. Darren knew it was coming before he saw it. Ren told him, the way she told him most things, without alarm, without urgency, in the tone of someone reporting weather. 6 ships had dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the KV-7 system. 4 were Covenant science vessels, 2 were not. Designation? Darren asked. Velhari Covenant Enforcement Division, Ren said. Military configuration, weapons systems active. He was in the ship's archive room when she told him, sitting cross-legged on the floor with 3 data panels open in front of him, because the chairs at the archive stations were built for people slightly taller than him, and the floor was more comfortable anyway. He had been down here for most of the 4 days since their first conversation. He slept on the ship now. He had sent his team a message on day 2 saying he was conducting deep structural assessment and needed time, which was the kind of vague professional language that bought him space without technically being a lie. Prith had not replied. That was unusual enough that he'd noticed it and filed it in a part of his brain labeled, "Look at that later." "How long until they reach orbital position?" he asked. "At current approach speed, 4 hours." He looked at the data panels. He had barely scratched the archive. Ren had 103,000 years of records, not just this ship's records, but everything that had been fed to her before the war ended. Every piece of information the old humanity had considered important enough to preserve in a sealed, buried, nearly indestructible location. It was not an archive. It was more like being handed every library ever built and told you had a long weekend. He had spent 4 days reading about the war. He had not slept much. The Void architects were not what he'd expected. He had built a picture of them in his head during Ren's first briefing. Enormous, alien, incomprehensible, the kind of thing that existed in a different category from life as he understood it, something that would be described in sweeping terms in the ship's records, something mythological. The records were not sweeping, they were technical. The architects were, as far as humanity's science teams had been able to determine, a collective. Not a hive mind in the simple sense, not one thing with many bodies, but something more like a long conversation that had been running for so long it had become indistinguishable from a single voice. Individual units existed. They were large. They were not biological in any standard framework. They were old. The estimates in the records ranged from 400,000 years to over 1 million, and the science teams had argued about the methodology on those estimates for decades, and the argument was still ongoing in the records, right up until the point where the teams stopped making records. What they wanted, what they were actually doing when they consumed stars, was the part the records were most uncertain about. The best theory, and Ren had flagged it as the best theory, with the note that best did not mean good, was that the architects were building something. Not in this space, in the fold. The energy from the consumed stars was being transferred there, fed into a construction process that none of humanity's probes had been able to fully image. Something enormous, something that had been under construction, based on the estimated start date, for about 200,000 years before humanity encountered them. Nobody knew what it was. The war records noted this with the kind of flat, factual tone that Darren was starting to recognize as the old humanity's way of writing about things that terrified them. They did not dramatize. They did not elaborate. They wrote down what they knew and left the rest as blank space, which somehow communicated the terror better than any amount of description would have. What humanity did know was what happened to a system when the architects finished with it. The star was gone, not collapsed, not gone nova, gone. A clean absence. The planets remained for a while, locked in orbits that now led nowhere, and then over the following centuries they drifted and cooled and died. The records had images of these systems. Darren had looked at them once and then moved on because looking at them a second time felt like standing at the edge of something with no bottom. 6,000 years of fighting that. With no help. He kept coming back to that. He knew it was not productive. He knew that the species who had allied with the architects had done so under conditions of impossible pressure, and that survival was a complicated thing, and that he was sitting in a comfortable chair 100,000 years after the fact, which made it easy to have opinions. He knew all of that. He kept coming back to it anyway. The fleet reached orbital position, and Admiral Sethka opened a communication channel to the dig camp on the surface. Darren watched the exchange through Wren's sensors. She had, without being asked, patched him into the dig camp's comm system. He had not asked her how she had done this. He was choosing to not know some things, for now, and that was one of them. Sethka was on screen in the dig camp's comm tent, and she looked the way she always looked, composed, precise, the long gray Velhari face arranged in the neutral expression of someone who was doing their job and found the concept of visible emotion professionally inappropriate. She was in full admiral's dress. She had not been in full dress the last time he'd seen her. At the mission briefing 6 weeks ago, people put on full dress when something was important enough to be ceremonial about it, or when they were being recorded. The dig site is hereby classified under Covenant Security Provision 7, she said. All personnel are to cease excavation activities immediately. All records, samples, and data collected are to be transferred to the science fleet for assessment. The site itself will be placed under Covenant containment, pending full review. Preth, who was the senior researcher on the surface, received this without visible reaction. Understood, Admiral. I will begin preparation of the transfer packages. Smooth, easy, like he had been expecting it. Darren sat on the floor of the archive room and looked at his data panels. Then he pulled up a new one and started searching the archive for something specific, something he had been circling around for 4 days without going directly to it. The end of the war, not the how of it. Wren had given him the shape of that. The after. What happened to the species? What happened to the old humanity in the period between the fold sealing and now? The records on this were thin. That was the first thing he noticed. Suspiciously thin. The war records were dense, detailed, cross-referenced, updated through 6,000 years of conflict with the kind of thoroughness that spoke to a civilization that understood it was living through something history would need to examine. And then, at a certain point, the density dropped. The last entries were sparse, functional, and then they stopped. Not dramatically, not mid-sentence. They just stopped, the way a conversation stops when the person talking has left the room. Wren had told him the last human had come aboard 103,000 years ago. The records ended approximately 103,000 years ago. He had known this, but sitting in front of it, looking at the actual files, the actual dates, the actual blank space where the next entry should have been, was different from knowing it. He searched for any record created after that point, any automated log, any system update, any file dated in the years following the last human entry. There were none from Wren. She had been in sleep mode. He knew that. But there were other records. Records that had been added to the archive that were not from Wren. Records in a file structure that was slightly different from the rest of the archive. A different organizational system. A different dating format. A different language. Records in Velhari script. He stared at them. Then he had Wren translate. They were administrative files, dry language, bureaucratic structure. The kind of records that were generated not to be read, but to document that something had happened. Meeting records. Agreement records. 7 species present at a gathering that had taken place approximately 98,000 years ago. The location was listed simply as the Covenant Administrative Corps, which was interesting because, by the official history, the Covenant had been founded 82,000 years ago. Someone had forgotten to scrub these particular files from the archive they'd buried, or they had been put here on purpose, by someone, a long time ago. He didn't know which. He added it to the file labeled, "Look at that later," which was getting crowded. He read the records. The meeting had been about one thing, the surviving civilizations, 7 of them, the ones that would become the founding species of the Covenant, had gathered to discuss what to do in the aftermath of the war. Specifically, what to do about the memory of it, what to tell the younger civilizations that would eventually arise, what the official history would say. The discussion was long. Darren read it in translation, which made it drier than it probably was in the original, but the shape of it came through. There were 2 positions. One group wanted full disclosure, a complete record of the war, of the architects, of humanity's role, preserved and taught. One group wanted to reduce the record, not eliminate it entirely, just thin it, minimize humanity's role, focus on the rebuilding, on the founding of the Covenant, on the new order. The second group won. The resolution was recorded in clean bureaucratic language that managed to describe the systematic removal of a species from its own history without once using a word that sounded bad. They called it historical consolidation. They called it narrative coherence for emerging civilizations. They called it ensuring stability in the recovery period. They had agreed to forget. Darren sat with the panel in his hands and did not move for a while. He was aware, in a distant way, that his hands were not shaking anymore. He was aware that something had shifted in the part of him that had always been slightly apologetic about being human, slightly aware of being the young species, the new arrival, the one who still had so much to learn. That part of him was still there, but something was sitting next to it now, something that did not apologize. He was still working out what to call it. He found the captain's log by accident. He was looking for something else, the technical specifications of the fold anchor system, because understanding what Wren was holding in place felt important, and he took a wrong turn in the archive's organizational structure, which was built in a logical system that had made complete sense to someone 100,000 years ago, and made partial sense to him now. He ended up in a personal records directory, not crew records, command records. The captain's log was the last file in the directory. It was not large. The captain had not been a person who wrote at length. Darren read through it from the beginning. It spanned 12 years, the last 12 years of the war, the years of the final campaign, the years of the fold operation. The entries were short, operational. We moved to this position. We engaged here. We lost this many. The captain's voice came through the brevity not despite it but because of it. A person who was too busy and too tired to spend words on anything that wasn't necessary, and who had chosen what was necessary with great care. He read all of it. The last entry was dated the day Wren had confirmed as the day the ship went underground, the day the crew had entered the fold. It was 3 words. Hold this line. Not a speech. Not a farewell. Not an explanation. 3 words, written by someone who was about to go somewhere they did not expect to come back from, and who had decided that what they needed to leave behind was an instruction, not a eulogy. Darren read it 3 times. Then he sat very still in the archive room for a long time and listened to the ship breathe around him. The low hum of systems that had been running for 100,000 years. The barely audible circulation of air being kept at exactly the right temperature for a species that was no longer here. The patient mechanical heartbeat of something that had been told to hold and had held. "Wren," he said. "Yes. Did you know the captain?" A pause. Not the 3-second pause of careful phrasing. A different kind. "I was operational during the captain's entire command. 12 years. What was she like?" Wren was quiet for long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, she was the kind of person who used 3 words when 3 words were enough. He nodded slowly. He looked at the panel with the last entry on it. 3 words. Enough for 100,000 years, apparently. Above him, on the surface, he could hear through Wren's sensors the sound of the dig camp being packed up, efficient, orderly. His team was removing their equipment, boxing their samples, following instructions. All except one. He checked the sensor feed and found Preth standing at the top of the excavation shaft, not packing, not moving, just standing there looking at the opening in the rock. The communication channel from the fleet opened again. Not Sethka this time. A communications officer, younger voice, reading from a prepared text. All personnel are required to complete evacuation of the surface site within 6 hours. The site will be sealed following evacuation. Dr. Voss, you are requested to exit the structure immediately. A transport will be provided. Darren looked at the archive. He looked at the data panels around him, each one showing a fraction of what was here. 100,000 years of records. The real history. The war. The agreement to forget. The 3 words at the end of a log that had held more weight than anything the Covenant had built in the time since. "Wren," he said, "what happens if I leave?" "The Covenant will reseal the excavation," Wren said. "They will do so more thoroughly than the original burial. They have better equipment than the species who buried me the first time. And the archive? I will remain. The archive will remain, but the probability of a second excavation, of another human finding this ship, approaches 0 under those conditions." A pause. "I calculate they will not make the same mistake twice." Darren closed the data panels one by one. He stood up. He stretched his back, which had been complaining for 2 days and was now staging something close to a formal protest. He thought about being the least important person in every room. He thought about historical consolidation. He thought about 3 words. He walked out of the archive room. He walked through the ship, back toward the bridge. The corridor lights moved with him, steady and patient. "Ren," he said, as he walked, "how long do we have before the fleet can take any direct action against the ship? Covenant military procedure for an unsanctioned structure in a classified site requires a formal assessment period of at least 22 hours before any physical intervention can be authorized." 22 hours. Yes. He stepped onto the bridge. He sat down in the captain's chair. He looked at the star map on the ceiling. He looked at the marked systems. He looked at the lines connecting them to the architect's range. "Then we have 22 hours, he said. "Tell me everything else." Outside, the Covenant fleet held its orbital position and waited, the way powerful things wait when they are confident the outcome is already decided. Inside the ship, Ren began to speak. And the archive began to hum, just slightly louder than before, the way a thing hums when it is no longer waiting to be found but waiting to be used. The kill order came at hour 14. Not for the ship, for the information. Darren was on the bridge when Ren intercepted it. A tight beam transmission from the fleet to the dig camp, encrypted in a Covenant military cipher that Ren cracked in 11 seconds, which was probably 11 seconds longer than she needed, and 8 seconds faster than should have been possible. The order was addressed to Preth. It referenced Provision 7, subsection 12, which Darren did not know by number, but Ren translated the relevant section without being asked. In the event that classified material has been accessed by unauthorized personnel, and in the event that said material poses a risk to Covenant stability, field commanders are authorized to pursue containment by all necessary means. All necessary means is understood to include destruction of the site and associated materials. All necessary means. He read it twice. Then he put the panel down on the console in front of him with the careful deliberateness of a person managing something they do not want to manage visibly. "They mean the ship," he said. "They mean the ship," Ren confirmed, "and the archive, and, I believe, the record of your presence here, which is easier to manage if you are inside the ship when it is destroyed rather than outside." The room was quiet. "That's a fairly direct way to put it," Darren said. "I am not built for indirection." He stood up. He walked to the front of the bridge and looked at the blank panels that he now knew, from 4 days of reading the ship's manual, a manual written in the oldest form of his own language, which he had been laboriously working through with Ren's help, were viewports. Full external view, when activated. He asked Ren to activate them. The panels cleared. Above him, in the airless dark above KV-7, the fleet was arranged in a loose arc. 4 science vessels holding distance. 2 military ships much closer, weapons ports closed but, as Ren indicated with 2 small red markers on the viewport overlay, not locked. He looked at them for a long time. "Can you fight them?" he asked. "Yes." "Would you win?" "Against those 6 ships, yes. If they called for reinforcements and I was required to fight a sustained engagement against a Covenant military response, the calculation becomes less favorable over time. I am 1 ship." A pause. "I am a very old ship. Old does not mean weak, but numbers are numbers. And if we run? I can outrun those ships. The question is where we run to. Every Covenant system will be closed to us within hours of departure. I have no fueling infrastructure outside Covenant space. I can sustain full operation on current reserves for approximately 8 months. 8 months? He turned that over. What did you do before? When you were waiting, how did you power yourself for 100,000 years? I was in sleep mode for 97,000 of them, Ren said. I am not a miracle. I am an engineering achievement, which is different. He almost smiled. He walked back to the captain's chair and sat in it, and looked at the star map and thought. The order had gone to Preeth. Preeth had not replied to it, just as he had not replied to the first one. He was still on the surface, Ren's sensors confirmed it, standing somewhere near the excavation shaft. Not evacuating, not preparing anything, just standing. Darren did not know what to do with Preeth right now, so he set him aside. Ren, he said, you told me the fold was sealed from the inside, that the crew went in and the door was shut. Yes. But you said you hold the external anchor, the lock on the outside. Yes. What does that mean? Exactly. What are you actually doing? The fold exists in a state of potential adjacency to this space, Ren said. It does not open on its own. It requires a key structure, a resonance point, to maintain accessibility. I am that resonance point. I project a field that keeps the interface between this space and the fold stable. Without me, the interface collapses. The fold becomes inaccessible from this side. And from the inside? A 3-second pause. Unknown. If the interface collapses, Darren said slowly, if you're gone, what happens to the people inside, to whatever's in there? The fold is a space, not a container. Things inside it do not cease to exist if the interface collapses. They simply become unable to exit through this point. Whether other exit points exist, whether they have been constructed or discovered from the inside over the past 100,000 years, I cannot say. A pause. I have not been able to say for 100,000 years. I find it is one of the things I do not think about directly. He heard something in that. Not emotion exactly, but the shape where emotion would be if Ren were built differently. He did not say so. There's something else, he said. Something you haven't told me yet. Silence. Ren. There is something I was going to tell you, she said. I was calculating the right time. Tell me now. The fold interface, Ren said. I monitor it, continuously. I have monitored it for 103,000 years. A pause. For the first approximately 100,000 years, it was stable, sealed, silent. He waited. For the last 3,000 years, Ren said, it has not been silent. The bridge felt different suddenly. Not colder, not louder, just differently weighted. What does that mean? He said. Something on the other side of the interface is applying pressure to it, Ren said. Not constant pressure, intermittent, rhythmic. She paused. I have no way to determine the source from this side. I can only tell you that the pressure is increasing. The intervals between pressure events have been shortening over the last 300 years. Like knocking, Darren said. Yes, Ren said. Like knocking. He sat with that. He sat with it for long enough that Ren, who did not typically fill silence, said quietly, the Covenant knows. I believe this is part of why the response to your discovery has been what it is, not only the historical record. The interface activity has been detectable by sufficiently advanced sensors for approximately 200 years. They have been detecting it and choosing not to act. Because acting would require admitting the fold exists, Darren said, which would require admitting the war happened, which would require admitting everything, Ren said. He stood up. He needed to move. He walked off the bridge, back into the corridor, and kept walking, deeper into the ship, past the archive room, past the engineering sections he had only briefly looked at. Ren's lights moved with him. He ended up in front of a door he had not opened before. It was at the lowest accessible level of the ship, and it was larger than the other doors, double wide, the kind of door that meant the room behind it was significant. The panel beside it had a different interface from the others, not a handprint reader, something more complex. What's in here? He asked. The memory core, Ren said. It is where I keep the ship's continuous record. Every moment of operation since my initial activation, every crew member, every conversation, every decision made on this ship over 12 years of war. A pause. And their imprints. Imprints. When the crew prepared to enter the fold, Ren said, they understood they might not return. Some of them chose to leave a copy, not a recording, a copy, a full pattern of their cognitive architecture, embedded in my memory core. They are not conscious, they are not alive, but they are responsive. If addressed correctly, they will respond in the way that person would have responded. Darren stared at the door. How many? He asked. 212 chose to leave imprints. The rest did not want to. Both choices were respected. A pause. The captain left an imprint. He put his hand on the panel. It read him. Not his handprint, he understood now, but something more than that, something in his biology that this ship had been built to recognize. The door opened. The memory core was the most alive-feeling room on the ship. That was the wrong word for it. Alive. And he knew it was wrong even as he thought it. The room was dark except for a soft blue light that came from the walls themselves, and it was full of structures he couldn't immediately name. Columns of some crystalline material, floor to ceiling, arranged in rows, each one faintly luminous. Thousands of them, the ship's memory, physically embodied, 100,000 years of moments, held in crystal in the dark. He walked between the columns. He could feel the hum of them, not through his ears, through the soles of his boots, a vibration so low, it was more feeling than sound. "How do I talk to them?" he asked. "Say a name," Ren said. He thought about what he needed to know. He thought about what question mattered most, given that they had, he checked, just under 8 hours left on the Covenant's assessment window before action could be authorized. He thought about the captain's log, 3 words, "Hold this line." He thought about the fold and the knocking, and the 300 years of a galaxy pretending not to hear it. "Captain," he said. He didn't know her name. He had read her log for 12 years and she had never written her own name in it, which felt exactly right. "Captain, I need to ask you something." The room changed. Not dramatically. A column near him brightened. The blue shifted. Something gathered in the space in front of him that he could not look at directly, not because it was bright, but because it kept being almost a shape, and then not. A presence made of light, and the memory of a person, which was not the person but was all that was left of her, which was more than nothing. He faced it. He was afraid in the way you are afraid when you are standing in front of something that deserves respect and you are not sure you are capable of it. "I need to know what you did," he said, "to win, what it actually cost, what you actually did." The presence was still. Then Ren translated, not the words. She had told him the imprints didn't use words exactly, but the meaning, the shape of what came from the column in the language of recorded memory. The old humanity had followed the architects into the fold. Not a small force, not a strike team, everything, every ship that could still fly, every person who could still fight. They had gone in together, all of what remained of 11 billion people compressed down to 4, and they had fought the architects on the architects' own ground, inside the fold, where the rules of the space they knew did not fully apply, and where the thing the architects had been building for 200,000 years was almost finished. They had destroyed it, not by outfighting the architects, not by finding a weapon that worked, by understanding, finally, after 6,000 years of war, what the thing being built actually was, and what it would do when it was complete, and understanding that there was only one way to prevent it that was certain. The construction had been eating the stolen stellar energy and converting it into a kind of anchor, a structure that would permanently fix the fold to this space, open it, permanently, turn the wall between spaces into a door that could never be closed. The architects would have had unlimited access to every star in the galaxy, unlimited fuel, unlimited expansion, forever. Humanity found the construction, and they took it apart. From the inside, piece by piece, with everything they had, while the architects fought them for every piece. The records in Ren's memory core described this in the flattest possible language, the language of a people who had moved past the point where large words meant anything. They took it apart. And when the last piece was gone, the fold began to collapse. Not all of it. The fold was too large to collapse entirely, but the interface, the connection point, the door, it began to close, fast, and there was one ship left near enough to the interface to exit before it sealed. Ren. The captain had ordered her out. The captain had stayed. Darren stood in the blue light of the memory core and looked at the presence that was all that was left of the person who had made that call, and he did not say anything, because there was nothing to say. Some things do not need a response. They need to be looked at without looking away. The presence waited. He thought about the knocking. 300 years of something pressing against the fold interface from the other side. Rhythmic, increasing. "Is it them?" he asked. "On the other side. Is it the crew? Is it—" He stopped. Started again. "Is it the architects?" Ren translated the imprint's response. "Unknown. It could be either. It could be something new." 300 years of knocking was too recent to be the original architects. They had been inside the fold when the interface sealed, fighting or retreating or whatever came after losing. 100,000 years was a long time even for something that old, but the fold was large. Things could survive in it that had not survived outside it. Things could have changed, or humanity could have found a way to reach the interface from the inside, after 100,000 years. He didn't know which answer was worse. He stood in the memory core for a long time. The columns hummed around him. 212 people who had made a copy of themselves and left it in the dark on a dead planet, not knowing if anyone would ever come, not knowing if the copy would ever matter. He thought about what it meant that they had done that they had made the copies, that some of them had not wanted to and that choice had been respected, that the ones who had chosen to stay in the archive had done so not because they expected rescue, but because they had wanted to be asked, eventually, if they had anything to say. He thought about 3 words written at the end of a 12-year log. He thought about the galaxy above him, going about its business. The Covenant. The species that had built a civilization on the careful forgetting of what had made that civilization possible. The species that had detected knocking on a sealed door for 200 years and had agreed, without meeting, without formal resolution, by the simple inertia of not wanting to know, agreed to ignore it. He thought about Preth standing at the shaft, not moving. He walked back to the bridge. He sat in the captain's chair. "Ren," he said, "we have 8 hours." 7 hours and 43 minutes, Ren said. Right. He looked at the viewports, the fleet above, weapons ports still closed, still waiting, still confident, the way powerful things wait when they believe the outcome is already settled. "I need to make a decision." "Yes," Ren said. "I'm working up to it," he said. "I know," Ren said. "I have been monitoring your heart rate." He looked at the fleet. He looked at the star map. He looked at the corridor lights that had followed him through the whole ship, steady and patient, the ship making sure he could see where he was going. He thought about what Ren had said on the first day. 2 functions. Hold the seal. Wait for humanity. He thought about the knocking. "Ren," he said, "what happens to the seal if you leave this position? If the ship moves?" "The anchor can move," Ren said. "The seal holds as long as the anchor exists. Location is not the constraint." "So the seal holds as long as you're intact?" "Yes. And the knocking. Whatever is on the other side, it can't get through while you're intact." "Correct." He nodded slowly. Outside, the fleet waited. Inside, the archive hummed. Somewhere below him, in a column of blue crystal, the imprint of a person who had ordered a ship out of a closing door and stayed behind, pressed against the edge of what it was made of, and waited, with the patience of something that had already waited for everything it was ever going to wait for, to see what the man in the captain's chair was going to do. 7 hours and 41 minutes. He sat in the chair. He started thinking. The decision came at hour 6. Not because he'd figured it out, because he'd stopped trying to figure it out, and the answer walked in on its own, the way answers do when you quit chasing them across the room. He sat in the captain's chair. He looked at the fleet. 6 ships. Weapons ports still closed, still so sure of themselves. He thought about the Velhari files buried in the archive, the ones in slightly different formatting, the ones somebody had forgotten to scrub, or planted on purpose, or both. He thought about the meeting, 7 species, the words historical consolidation, written in clean bureaucratic script over the grave of 60 billion people. He thought about the knocking. 300 years of something on the other side of a sealed door, pressing against it, getting louder, getting closer together, the galaxy detecting it for 200 years and agreeing, by the powerful inertia of collective silence, to pretend the sound wasn't there. He thought about what happens when you ignore a knock long enough. Eventually the door comes down. "Ren," he said. "Yes." "The broadcast system, the one you used to send the activation tone when I touched the wall." "Yes." "Range? With full power allocation, I can reach every active relay station in Covenant space simultaneously. Approximately 400 inhabited systems within 6 hours of signal propagation." He nodded. "The archive," he said. "The full archive, the war records, the Velhari meeting files, the architects, the fold, the knocking, all of it. Can you compress it into a broadcast package?" 3 seconds. "I have been preparing that package," Ren said, "for approximately 97,000 years." He blinked. "I did not know when the moment would come," she said, "so I prepared for it continuously. Every sleep cycle, every maintenance window, I refined it. What to include, what order, what format would be readable by the most species with the least prior context." A pause. "I have had time to be thorough." Of course she had. Of course she had spent 97,000 years in the dark, preparing a message for someone who hadn't come yet, because that was the kind of thing Ren did. That was what she was. Devotion with no object, sharpening itself in the silence until the object arrived. He breathed out slowly. "Ren, if we broadcast, if every system in the Covenant space gets the full record, the Covenant can't unring that bell." "No. They'll come for us." "Yes. faster and with more ships than what is currently in orbit. And we can't fight a sustained engagement. No. So we run. Yes. He looked at the star map. He looked at the fold marker, the single point Wren had placed at the edge of known space, the interface, the door. There's only one place they can't follow, he said. Silence. Not the careful silence of phrasing. A different kind, the kind that confirms something already understood. Wren, he said, when we go in, if we go in, what are we going toward? The crew? The architects? Something new? Unknown. Take a guess. 3 seconds. I have had 100,000 years to guess, Wren said. The knocking began 300 years ago. Not 100,000 years ago. Not 50,000. 300. Something changed. Something woke up, or arrived, or decided to try. A pause. The crew went in to destroy a construction. They succeeded. What they encountered afterward, what they did for the next 100,000 years, whether they survived, I don't know. I have theories. I don't like them. Tell me one. The crew survived, Wren said. They have been inside the fold for 100,000 years. They found a way to sustain themselves, to persist, in a space not built for biological life, or they changed in ways that make that distinction less relevant. And 300 years ago, they found the interface, our interface. This anchor point, she paused, and they have been knocking since. Darren sat with that. 100,000 years. He thought about what a person becomes after 100,000 years in the dark, what they hold on to, what they let go of, whether the thing knocking was still recognizable as human, and whether that question even mattered anymore. He thought about the captain. He thought about 3 words. He stood up. He sent one message before the broadcast. To Preth. Not an explanation, not an apology. 5 words. Don't be in the shaft. He did not know if Preth would understand. He thought Preth probably would. Preth was the kind of person who understood things without needing them explained. He'd spent 4 days not replying to orders he didn't agree with. That was its own kind of message. He sent it. Then he sat back in the captain's chair and said, Wren, broadcast. The ship moved, not in the direction of the fleet. Straight up, vertical launch through the excavation shaft, through 83 meters of rock that had been carved and drilled over 3 weeks of careful work, and then out through the surface and into the airless dark above KV-7, moving faster than anything that old had any right to move. Because Wren had not spent 100,000 years in sleep mode, she had spent it maintaining every system to full operational capacity, which it turned out was considerable. The fleet reacted. Signals fired between the ships, voices in Velhari and Harkin crackling over the military channels Wren was still monitoring, weapons ports opening, the 2 military ships moving to intercept. Wren did not fight them. She broadcast. The signal went out on every frequency simultaneously. Tight beam, wide beam, relay to relay propagation. Every method at once. The archive package she had spent 97,000 years preparing. Compressed and formatted and ready. Moving outward from KV-7 at the speed of light, and then faster along the relay network. Jumping from station to station through Covenant space. 400 inhabited systems in 6 hours. The military ships fired. The shots hit. The ship rocked. Actually rocked. A physical shudder that ran through the hull and up through the chair and into Darren's spine. Wren did not wince. She absorbed it. Damage? Darren said. Minimal. They are using warning-level ordnance. They want the ship intact for study. They'll escalate. Yes. They will figure out what we have done in approximately 4 minutes. 4 minutes. He looked at the viewport. The dead planet falling away below. The fleet above, spreading out. The military ships circling to cut off angles. The stars beyond them. The clean, permanent stars that had been burning since before humanity's first civilization rose. That had kept burning through 6,000 years of war and 100,000 years of careful forgetting. He thought about what those stars looked like to the architects. Fuel, inventory, a buffet so large it never seemed to end. He thought about 4 billion people deciding they were going to fight that. He thought about how the math looked, how every rational calculation pointed to the same answer. You cannot win. You are too few. You have been fighting too long. The logical thing is to stop. He thought about the fact that they hadn't. Wren, he said, how long to the fold interface at full speed? 14 hours. The military ships were repositioning. The weapons ports were fully open now. The warning level shots were done. "They've figured it out," Wren said. "I know." The first real shot hit like a fist through the hull. A whole section of the corridor behind the bridge went dark in Wren's sensor display, then immediately came back on as backup systems engaged. A sound ran through the ship. Not an alarm, not a bell, just the deep structural groan of something very old being asked to remember it was also very hard. It remembered. "Wren," Darren said, "can we make 14 hours? "Unknown." A pause. "Probably. Probably. I have been in worse situations," Wren said. "Once." He gripped the armrests. The ship accelerated, past the fleet, through the formation, because going through was faster than going around, and Wren had apparently decided that was fine. The ship rolling as it moved to make itself a smaller target, moving with a fluidity that should not have been possible for something the size of a city block but was, because whoever had built her had understood that size and speed were not opposites if you built them right. The fleet came after them. They came after them for 14 hours. Wren ran. She did not run straight. She moved in angles, in calculated evasions, in patterns that Darren slowly understood were not random but predictive. Wren modeling each gunner's timing and moving in the space between shots. 100,000-year-old intelligence playing a faster game than anything in the fleet had practice against. The ship took hits. Some of them hurt. He felt them in his teeth, in his chest, the ship shuddering and absorbing and continuing. Darren sat in the captain's chair and watched, and said very little, because there was nothing useful to say. Wren did not need instruction. Wren needed time. He gave her time by staying out of her way. An hour out from the interface, Preth's voice came over a personal comm channel. Quiet, calm, the voice of someone who had made a decision and was at peace with it. "Voss?" "Preth." The broadcast reached the fleet's own relay systems 40 minutes ago. They could not suppress it without shutting down their own communications. A pause. They did not shut down their own communications. Darren closed his eyes briefly. "It's out." "It is out," Preth said. "All of it. The Covenant Administrative Corps has been attempting to issue corrections for 30 minutes. The corrections are not being received well. There are species in the Covenant who are..." A pause, and something in Preth's voice that Darren had never heard before. Something that might have been the sound of a very old, very tired person putting down something heavy. Very upset. "Are you safe?" "I am on a Covenant science vessel. I am arguably the least safe person in this system at this moment." A pause. "I find I am not particularly concerned." "Preeth, I read the files, Voss, when you were in the ship. Before the fleet arrived, I came down the shaft and I read the files on the corridor wall. The whole system." A pause. "I knew what the letters were. I recognized them before you descended." Darren was quiet. "My species history says we had no contact with the architects," Preth said. "We were too far from their expansion, too small, too early." He paused. "The archive says differently." There was nothing to say to that, so Darren didn't say anything. "Hold this line," Preth said. The comm closed. The interface was ahead. Wren had put it on the viewport, a marker, a location in empty space that looked like nothing, that was nothing to every sensor in the Covenant fleet except Wren's own, which could see it for what it was. A door. "Wren," Darren said. "The knocking, right now, is it still happening?" "Yes." A pause. "It has changed." "Changed how?" "It stopped," Wren said. 46 minutes ago, precisely when the broadcast began propagation." She paused. "It has not resumed." He stared at the marker on the viewport. Something on the other side had heard the broadcast. Something on the other side had stopped knocking. "Wren," he said. His voice was level. He was mildly amazed at that. "What do you think that means?" 3 seconds. "I think," Wren said, "that they knew we would come, eventually, and I think the knock was not an attempt to break through." She paused. "I think it was a signal, telling us to hurry." The fleet was still behind them, still firing. Closer now, because Wren was slowing for the interface transition, the physics of crossing between spaces requiring a reduction in velocity that she could not avoid, and was being forced to perform while being shot at, which she did, with the calm of something that had survived circumstances the fleet behind them could not imagine. Darren looked at the viewport, at the marker, at the nothing that was a door. He thought about 100,000 years, about a species that had compressed itself from 11 billion to 4 billion to however many it took to walk into a closing door and seal it from the inside. He thought about what kind of people those were, what they had become in the dark, in the fold, in a space not built for them, across a stretch of time so long it made the entire history of the Covenant look like an afternoon. He thought about them hearing the broadcast. All of it, the archive, the war records, their own history, sent back out into a galaxy that had spent 100,000 years pretending they never existed. He thought about what it would mean to hear that. After all that time, he thought about 3 words. "Ren," he said. "Yes." "Take us in." The ship crossed the interface. One moment, the fleet behind them, the shots, the dead planet receding, the stars of the galaxy spread out in every direction, 400 inhabited systems, receiving a signal that would not stop arriving just because the ship that sent it was gone. The next moment, something else, something adjacent, the fold. The viewport cleared. Inside was not dark the way outside was dark. It was a different quality, lighter in some directions, heavier in others. A space that had its own rules about illumination and distance and scale. Rules that Darren's eyes were already trying to find patterns in, and finding them. Strange ones, beautiful ones, the kind that lived on the wrong side of familiar. Ren was quiet. He was quiet. Then she said, "Darren." "Yeah. Look ahead." He looked. There were lights. Not stars, not the fold's own ambient illumination. Moving lights. Structured lights. The kind that meant ships. A lot of ships. They were arranged, not in a military formation, not in a fighting spread, in something more like a welcome, a corridor of lights, wide enough to fly through, pointed inward, waiting. His throat closed. He kept his face still. He did not manage it entirely. "Ren," he said. His voice was careful, level, more level than anything he had said in the last 14 hours. "How many?" "Counting," Ren said. A pause. Still counting. The lights went on, deeper into the fold, further than the viewport could resolve, further than Ren's sensors had finished mapping. Thousands. "Ren." "Yes. They're still human, aren't they?" "Not a question." "Not quite." 3 seconds. "They are something," Ren said. "Something that started as human and has had 100,000 years to become." She paused. "Whether that is still the word, I don't know. I will know more when we are closer." He nodded. He sat in the captain's chair of the oldest human ship in existence, on the inside of a door that had been sealed for longer than recorded history, surrounded by a fleet of lights that had been waiting in the dark for someone to come through. Behind him, in the galaxy, the signal was still spreading, station to station, system to system, the archive unfolding across 400 inhabited worlds in a wave that no one could stop, that had already reached too many people to contain, that was already being read by species who had spent 80,000 years believing a comfortable lie, and were now holding the truth in their hands for the first time. The Covenant was fracturing. He knew that without seeing it. The fracture lines had been there for 100,000 years, covered over by careful language and bureaucratic silence. The archive had found every one of them. And here, on the other side of the door, 100,000 years of human history that the galaxy had written over and buried and agreed to forget, was arranged in a corridor of lights and waiting, patient as stone, steady as something that had held this long, and understood that a little more time meant nothing. The ship moved forward. The lights on either side of the corridor were still, not moving toward them, not challenging, just present, just burning, the way something burns when it has been burning long enough that burning is simply what it is. Darren looked at them. He thought about Preth putting down something heavy. He thought about the knocking stopping. He thought about 3 words written at the end of a log by someone who had made a decision and recorded it in the smallest number of words that decision required, and then walked through a door. He said nothing. Sometimes 3 words are enough. Sometimes what you hold is a line, and sometimes the line holds back.